Hi, I'm Roz Naylor. I direct the Center on Food Security and the Environment at Stanford University. And today we have Professor Quentin Grafton with us. Professor Grafton is the professor of water economics and public policy within the Crawford School of Public Policy at Australian National University. He also holds the UNESCO chair in water economics and transboundary water governance. And Quentin, we're very happy to have you here
I'm very
today.
happy to be here, Ross.
So
Thanks for bringing me in.
it's a topic,
Yep.
probably, we couldn't find a more important topic for food security. So
Yeah.
we're very excited to hear your views. I was curious about the UNESCO chair just up
Yes.
front. Can you tell me, are you the first holder of the UNESCO chair?
That particular chair, yeah. So I helped establish the chair in 2010 at the Australian National University. There are other UNESCO chair holders in Australia, but not in water. And I think there's about 25 to 30 UNESCO chair holders globally in the area broadly defined of fresh water.
So incredibly prestigious, needless
I don't
to
know about
say.
that, but it's nice to have and nice to be connected with that sort of sisterhood and brotherhood of fellow chairs and UNESCO centers as well.
That's great. Well, what impresses me about your CV and your background is how many countries you have worked in and how well you understand transboundary water governance and water governance within countries. I was particularly interested in your current work in Australia as well as your earlier work in South Asia and even your current work in South Asia.
Yeah.
They seem so different. Australia is known to be such a good steward of water, although that may not be completely true.
Sure.
And South Asia has a number of problems.
Exactly,
Can you talk about some of the differences and similarities between the two in terms of water governance?
I mean, obviously the magnitude of the problems in the context of, when you say South Asia, let's say India, huge water problems that are long-standing, groundwater over extraction, and then there's a series of surface water issues as well, water quality in particular, lack of access to water quality of a sufficient magnitude and volume. Australia doesn't have those issues. We do have in some remote areas that there are water quality issues and access issues, but it's for a very tiny proportion of Australians. So really very different governance issues, both democracies, let's say India and Australia, but just the ability to deal with problems because we've got 25 million Australians versus 1.25 billion Indians. So yeah, the magnitude, the scale is just, we're completely different level. But both countries have serious water scarcity issues, and that has translated into water security issues and concerns as well. And in both countries, where I've been working on more in Australia than in India, but both countries, they actually have to get the right balance in the context of making sure there's enough water, yes, to meet current needs, current demands, whether it's be irrigation, whether it's for drinking water, whether it be for industry, but at the same time, and this is the critical point, future demands, because those demands are growing and growing rapidly in the case of India. So how is it all going to add up? How is it going to be possible to meet it all in the next two or three decades? And that's the problem. That's the challenge. And that's what I've been trying to think through in the context of India, and of course in Australia as well.
Yeah, I think as an economist, we always say water is just not priced in agriculture.
That's
so
right.
agriculture steals or takes all the water
That's
by
right.
their own right.
That's right.
And until we have functional water markets,
Yes.
it's never going to work. I think Australia has fairly good water markets.
We do. I think could possibly be described as being the best in the world in the context of water markets. I wouldn't be very clear about that in the sense that these water markets have developed over several decades. The value, the total value is maybe about 13 billion if you took all the value of the water rights, let's say in the Murray-Darling Basin. Turnover of about $1 billion and several thousand transactions annually, and then enables water to be basically transferred upwards of 1,800 kilometres. So there's substantial trades taking place, and we have evidence from the big drought that we had, the Millennium Drought, that these water trades, because of the water markets, facilitated a whole ability of farmers to cope with the drought in a much more effective way than if they hadn't had the water markets. So nothing's perfect, but certainly where we are today in 2018 and water markets in Australia than where we were in, let's say, 1988, and what they've been able to deliver a good news story. Of course, most places in the world don't have these formalized, effective water markets. A lot of places will have these informal water markets where there'll be some sort of trade between a farmer and another farmer. And there's some sort of transactions that will take place where some urban centres will go in and they'll make some purchase some way or other from a group of farmers to get some water. Those sorts of things do happen, sometimes formally, sometimes more informally. But there are very few places in the world where you actually have well-functioning water markets. So the United States does have water markets. They have some limitations, but they do, and they've been other places. But by and large, no, they don't exist in most places in the world in any formal way.
Do you see some parallels between the Marley River Basin and California, for example, or are they just...
Look, I think there are substantial, given that they're, different places in the world, the climate is fairly similar, Mediterranean climate, both arid or semi-arid, depending where you are in California or where you are in Australia. Agriculture predominates in terms of diversions, and there's a whole set of issues about how to get sufficient water to meet other water demands. And just like in California, and it's true in the Murray-Darling Basin, water demands have been increasing for other purposes other than, they've also been increasing for agriculture,
yeah.
but for other purposes. And so how do you get that balance? How do you deal with environmental issues, environmental flows, and the river system flows, and how do you manage to grow the food that you want or need? So those are trade-offs. They're very clear trade-offs, and so you need to have mechanisms and processes to deal with those trade-offs effectively and to do it in a cost-effective way.
Yeah, these are certainly our challenges.
Yes,
here.
they are big challenges.
So this field of water economics and water governance, so important, and we're trying to invest in it here at Stanford.
Good.
Is it a growing field? How would you characterize the field itself, and how should we be thinking about this at Stanford in terms of where to put our investments and what to be looking for?
Well, certainly in the context of water economics and governance, I believe it's a growing field. And when I say a growing field, I mean there's a growing demand and concern about these issues, as there should be, which is good in the sense that people are realizing that these are not trivial issues. They're substantive, major, and global issues, as well as regional issues. So yes, the Sustainable Development Goals, focusing on Development 6 with water, UN High-Level Panel on Water, they're all indications that water is becoming increasingly viewed as a critical resource and how it's used. So in terms of where you want to invest your, dollars, so to speak, you obviously want to presumably invest in somebody who's familiar with the US environment and understanding, and given this is the Western United States. But I would also say, given Stanford's global perspective, that you would need individuals who would also have a global perspective, because although the issues are very pertinent and relevant for California and for the Western United States, that the world is bigger than that. And what happens, let's say, in the Gangetic Plains of India really does matter. There's hundreds of millions of people who live there. So, or what's happening in Southern Africa, or an El Nino event. Those sorts of issues, and it's not just drought issues, not just scarcity issues. There's a set of issues associated with flooding, and you mentioned earlier, Ros, in terms of the pricing. Water pricing is a critical issue globally. Very few places have got it right, if any. Quite frankly, and so getting that right and getting that sorted in some sense, and that requires a process, a series of engagements over a long period of time. I think it seems to me that you'd want to have that skill set as well.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense in our Center on Food Security, because
Absolutely.
we look at the global food system,
Absolutely.
and water is probably the most important resource in terms of what's going to happen in the future here. So today you're going to talk about some of these issues. Can you give us a punchline of what you're going to talk about?
The 30-second punchline. Really, it's highlighting risks. So, as you emphasized in terms of food, the food and water connections, it seems so obvious, but until recently, just in the last few years, they were sort of completely divided. And models that were looking at global projections of food, they didn't actually take into account the water resource constraint. I mean, it sounds crazy, but that's, you know, we're talking in the last few years, that's changed, started to change. So what I'm doing in this presentation is sort of a synthesis and thinking about what are the global food security issues, focusing more on availability than the other dimensions, and then bringing in the water dimension and seeing, well, what do they actually imply? And you put the two things together, and what they imply is that there are very real risks. These are risks that can be managed, mitigated, and dealt with. I mean, I'm optimistic about it, but they're not risks that you can just leave unmanaged, and they're not risks that you can just treat as business as usual. So the bottom line is really big risks, but there are ways that we can address and respond to those risks effectively, decision-making processes, and modeling approaches as well.
Well, this is just the information that we need here today and at our center. We're so delighted to have you as a visitor now and hopefully in the future as well.
Well, thank you again for inviting me, and I'm very pleased to be here.
Thanks for coming.
Okay.